The first thing I noticed was that I could breathe, which was wrong because people like me usually can't. Breathing came easy. Too easy. My lungs expanded without resistance. No sharp panic clawing up my throat, no familiar vice squeezing my ribs. That alone was enough to tell me something had gone catastrophically off script. I didn't open my eyes right away. Old habit. If this was a cell, I wanted to map it by sound first. Silence. Not the dripping, humming, fluorescent buzz kind of silence. This one was controlled. Expensive. The kind of quiet you buy on purpose. My chest felt heavy, like someone had laid a warm stone right over my sternum. Not pain. Pressure. The aftermath of suppression drugs maybe. The kind that knock an omega flat without technically violating any laws. My ears rang softly, a distant ocean trapped inside my skull. I waited for pain. It didn't come. That was mistake number 2. When I finally opened my eyes, I expected concrete. Bars. Restraints. Instead, I got a ceiling. Smooth, matte, light gray. Indirect lighting. No cameras blinking obviously at me, which only meant they were better hidden. I turned my head slightly and took in the room piece by piece. Minimalist. Almost tasteful. A bed wide enough to roll over in. Clean white walls. A small table bolted to the floor. No sharp edges. And, this part made my stomach tighten. A floor-to-ceiling window. Real glass. Reinforced, probably, but still. Outside was forest. Dense, dark green, motionless like it was holding its breath. Someone wanted me comfortable. That scared me more than chains ever could. I shifted, testing my limbs slowly. No cuffs. No restraints. My clothes were different. Soft fabric, loose, neutral. Someone had changed me. Carefully. The door was solid, dark steel, absolutely not subtle. I could feel the presence behind it like pressure against my skin. Guards. Hunters, most likely. People who knew exactly what I was and what buttons not to push, unless ordered. I swallowed. My instincts stayed quiet, leashed so tightly they almost felt dead. I hated that feeling. Hated how calm my body was pretending to be. Then the air changed. Not scent, not yet, but attention. The sense of being noticed by something that didn't rush, didn't hesitate. The door opened without drama. He walked in like the room already belonged to him. Ryan Vale filled the space without trying. Tall. Broad shoulders under a tailored black jacket that looked more ceremonial than tactical. No visible weapons. No rush in his movements. He stopped a few steps away from the bed and stood there, hands relaxed at his sides. Still. Controlled. His eyes locked onto mine like they'd been waiting. Too focused. Too precise. Like he wasn't just seeing me, but tracking micro-reactions. Breathing, pupils, muscle tension. I felt dissected in real time. So, I said, my voice dry but steady. Thank God for professional pride. Either this is the nicest holding cell I've ever seen, or I'm about to be very creatively executed. His lips didn't move. Not a smile. Not a frown. You're awake faster than expected, he said. His voice was calm. No growl, no dominance layered into it. Just flat. Intentional. I pushed myself up onto my elbows. My chest tightened again. Instincts rattling their cage, but nothing else happened. No pain. No surge. No force. That wasn't an answer, I said. Which usually means the answer's unpleasant. Ryan Vale studied me for another beat, then spoke. You're here because killing you would be inefficient. The words landed clean. No threat dressing. No flair. I laughed before I could stop myself. Sharp. Incredulous. Oh, this is bad, I said. You don't say things like that unless you've run the math. I have. Let me guess, I added. Heart thudding now despite myself. I'm not a prisoner. You're not violating any treaties. And I should be grateful. His gaze didn't waver. You're not a prisoner, he said. And, you're not free. There it was. I searched his face for the lie. Found none. That somehow made it worse. My name is Niko, I said. If you're planning to keep me, you should start with that. I know who you are. Of course you do. Ryan Vale tilted his head just slightly, like he was adjusting focus. Rest, he said. We'll talk when your body stops pretending it didn't almost shut down. The door opened behind him again. I watched him leave, pulse loud in my ears, breath still coming far too easy. Whatever this was. It wasn't captivity. And I had the sinking feeling that made it far more dangerous. Daylight changed the room without making it kinder. The morning sun slipped through the reinforced glass in clean pale lines, stripping the place of last night's shadows. It should have made things clearer, safer. Instead, it highlighted how intentional everything was. The lack of clutter. The careful neutrality. The way nothing invited damage or escape. Someone had designed this room to be lived in. That thought sat heavy in my stomach. I was awake when the door opened this time. Sitting on the edge of the bed, bare feet on the floor, posture relaxed on purpose. If Ryan Vale thought he was walking into a broken Omega, I was going to disappoint him immediately. He didn't look surprised to see me upright. "You sleep lightly," he said. "I don't trust rooms that pretend not to be cages," I replied. "Fair trade." He stopped in the same spot as before. Same distance. Same restraint. The man had consistency like a weapon. "No restraints," he said, gesturing vaguely around us. "No sedation unless medically necessary. You can move freely inside the residence." "And the door," I said. "Does it open for me too?" "No." There it was. "No chains," I said slowly. "But no exit." "Correct." I tilted my head, studying him the way I'd studied hostage-takers and cult leaders and desperate men with nothing left to lose. "You're missing the part where I agree." "You already did," he said calmly. I let out a short laugh. "I was unconscious. You didn't fight when you woke up." Now that was interesting. My irritation flared, sharp and familiar. Anger, I could work with. Fear made sloppy decisions. Anger sharpened them. "Let's be clear," I said. "You don't get cooperation just because you didn't hurt me." "I know." "Then, why am I here?" Finally, something flickered. Not emotion, attention. Like I'd stepped onto a more precise frequency. "Because you operate where the law fails," Ryan said. "And because you don't break when most Omegas do." Oh, he'd been paying attention to that too. I felt the old professional itch kick in, that dangerous blend of curiosity and pride. The instinct to poke the structure until it revealed its weak points. "So this is an interview?" I asked. "Should I dress up? Bring references?" "This is not an interrogation." "Then what is it?" He looked at me for a long moment, weighing something internal. "An assessment." I leaned back on my hands, feigning ease while my pulse steadily climbed. "You could have sent a request. You wouldn't have accepted it." He wasn't wrong, and that annoyed me more than being right had any right to. "Okay," I said, shifting gears. "Terms, then." He raised an eyebrow. "You're holding me without charges, without consent, and without an exit," I continued calmly. "If you want anything resembling cooperation, you're going to need boundaries." "I've already set them." "No," I corrected. "You set limits. Boundaries are negotiated." Silence stretched between us. I pushed. Just a little. "I answer what I choose. I don't lie, but I don't confess either. I don't perform obedience. And if my body starts failing again, I decide who touches me." Ryan Vale considered that like a mathematician evaluating a proof. Finally, he nodded. "Accepted." That should have felt like winning. It didn't. Because the satisfaction I expected never came, just a creeping unease curling in my ribs. "You're not looking for a statement," I said slowly, realization clicking into place. "You don't actually care what I did." "No," he agreed. "I care why." My instincts stirred at that. Not the feral panic they'd been trained to produce, but something sharper. More alert. I'd negotiated with terrorists, criminals, fathers who'd lost everything. They all wanted admission. Control. A moment of leverage. Ryan Vale didn't. He was watching me like a puzzle he respected enough not to force. And that, somehow, made him the most dangerous man I'd ever sat across from. The corridors smelled like disinfectant and quiet discipline. White walls. Polished floors. No windows. Every step echoed just enough to remind you not to run. The base wasn't built to cage people. It was built to direct them. Lines of movement. Lines of sight. Control disguised as order. Ryan Vale walked a half step ahead of me. Close enough to block my path if he wanted to, far enough not to touch. That mattered. Unfortunately, 2 guards flanked us. I kept my hands loose, posture open, head high. If you're going to be surrounded by hunters, you might as well look unashamed. We didn't make it 20 meters before the tension sharpened. "That's him?" A voice cut in. I turned before Vale did, and found a man leaning against the far wall. Alfa. Obviously. Short dark hair, sharp jaw, eyes that looked at me like I was a malfunctioning object. Really not what I expected. Disappointments are part of life, I offered pleasantly. His mouth twitched. Not a smile. A warning. Elijah Cross, Ryan said. Stand down. Cross pushed off the wall anyway and approached. Too close. Deliberate. This Omega was embedded with a rogue cell, Cross said. He got people killed. My pulse kicked. Correction, I said lightly. I tried to keep them alive. Differing philosophies. Cross's scent hit me then. Controlled aggression, iron and smoke. It wasn't overpowering. It didn't need to be. My instincts reacted anyway, flaring hot and fast. I smiled. It was a terrible idea. Also irresistible. Their reactions told the story immediately. Hunters stiffened. Hands shifted near weapons. Omegas weren't supposed to smile like that under pressure. We were supposed to lower our eyes. Fold inward. I'd never been very cooperative. Careful, Cross growled. You're not in negotiation rooms anymore. No, I said. I'm in a hallway full of people who kill monsters for a living and still look afraid of one Omega who won't shut up. The air tightened. Behind Cross stood a woman with a tablet tucked against her chest. Medium height. Dark hair pulled back. Sharp eyes that took in the room without grabbing it. Mara Quinn. She didn't glare. Didn't sneer. She observed. I felt catalogued and weighed, and oddly that felt safer. Eli, she said quietly. You're projecting. Cross bristled. He's destabilizing the unit. Because you let him, she replied evenly. I liked her immediately. The problem was my body had other priorities. The interaction spike, fear, tension, aggression, hit my pheromone control like a hammer. I shoved it down hard, locking the response behind years of training and sheer spite. Bad move. The suppression backfired almost instantly. Heat flushed my skin. My chest tightened. Breath coming just a fraction too fast. The floor felt farther away than it should have. I kept smiling. Because if they noticed weakness now, it would never stop being part of the equation. Cross stepped closer, scent flaring. You think this is a game? My vision edged silver. Ryan's presence shifted. Subtle, but unmistakable. He didn't move between us. Didn't raise his voice. But the space adjusted around him. Like gravity had picked a new center. That's enough, he said. Cross stopped. Ryan's eyes flicked to me. Not to my face, to my shoulders. My breathing. The tension I hadn't fully hidden. He saw. He said nothing. No order. No command. No scent push to drown mine out. Just awareness. That almost undid me. Mara watched the exchange with narrowed eyes, something thoughtful sharpening her expression. Ryan turned and continued down the corridor. The unspoken expectation pulled me with him. As we walked, my body slowly stabilized. The world sliding back into proper proportions. My instincts stayed coiled, uneasy but contained. Hunters didn't like Omegas who smiled. Ryan Vale, I was beginning to suspect, didn't like Omegas who stopped mattering. And that distinction might be the thing that got me killed, or kept me alive. The negotiation room overlooked the forest. That was the first mistake. Floor-to-ceiling glass curved along one wall, reinforced but nearly invisible, blurring the line between inside and out. The trees stood motionless beyond it, dark and dense, like a witness that would never testify. The table was simple. 2 chairs. No restraints. No recording equipment in sight, which didn't mean there wasn't any. Ryan Vale gestured to a seat and waited. I didn't like waiting. I sat anyway. He took the opposite chair, leaving exactly the same amount of space as everywhere else. Consistent. Precise. Infuriating. So, I said, folding my hands together. Is this where you ask me why I was embedded with a group everyone pretends doesn't exist? No, he answered. I blinked. No? You'll tell me, he said calmly. If I give you time, I huffed out a breath. That's optimistic. Ryan leaned back slightly. Not relaxed, never that, but open. Hands visible. Posture non-threatening in a way that reeked of intention. He said nothing. The silence stretched. I hated this part. Hated the way my own mind rushed to fill space when no one stopped it. I'd trained myself to control conversations by pressure. Ask sharp questions, set terms, dominate flow. This wasn't that. This was absence. I was paid to prevent escalation, I said finally, annoyed that the words had escaped at all. Not to babysit idealists with guns. Ryan didn't interrupt. The cell I was with didn't trust hunters. They had reasons, garbage ones, but still. I shrugged. Someone panicked. Shots fired. I got out, they didn't. Still nothing. I clenched my jaw. The forest beyond the glass watched me in perfect quiet. "You're very comfortable letting me talk," I said. "Yes." "You're negotiating like you expect me to beg." He met my gaze, steady and unapologetic. "No," he said. "Like you expect me to lie." The words landed harder than any threat so far. I felt it. That sharp twist of irritation deep in my chest. Not fear. Not submission. Anger at being seen correctly without invitation. "You think I manipulate people?" I said. "I think you protect them by controlling the narrative," Ryan replied. "Including yourself." I laughed, short and sharp. "You make it sound noble." "It can be," he said. "Or it can be destructive." I leaned back, mirroring him without realizing it until too late. "And which am I today?" "That," he said neutrally, "depends on why you chose that mission." There it was again. The why. The insistence on motive instead of confession. I exhaled slowly, fingers tightening together. My instincts buzzed, unsure where to anchor. This wasn't a fight I could throw myself into. There was no opponent to push against. "I don't like being managed," I said quietly. "Omegas don't survive long when they're treated like projects." "I don't manage people," Ryan replied. "I evaluate risks. And I'm a risk." "Yes." Something almost like humor flickered behind his eyes. Almost. An interesting one. That shouldn't have mattered. It did. I realized then, with a jolt I resented deeply, that I wasn't resisting because he was forcing me. I was struggling because he wasn't. And for the first time since waking up breathing far too easily, I felt the uneasy sense that the ground beneath me had shifted. Not because I was losing control, but because no one was trying to take it from me at all. Night came quietly. No alarms. No locking routines I could hear. Just the gradual darkening of the forest beyond the window, the glass turning into a black mirror that faintly reflected my own shape back at me. I lay on the bed fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, tracking my breathing like it might suddenly decide to betray me again. It didn't wait long. The first warning was heat. Too sharp, too sudden, blooming under my skin without permission. My chest tightened in response, each breath coming a fraction shallower than the last. I sat up, planting my feet on the floor, grounding like I'd been taught years ago. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. The ringing in my ears returned. Louder now. My hands trembled, fine motor controls slipping like sand through my fingers. The room tilted, slow and sickening, the edges blurring. "No," I muttered. "Not now." Suppressing pheromones under high stress always came with consequences. Usually delayed, usually manageable. This was neither. My instincts clawed up hard, desperate and raw. Fear spiked, real fear, not the strategic kind I wore like armor, and my body answered before my mind could keep up. My vision narrowed, breath stuttering. Oxygen suddenly an abstract concept I had to negotiate for. I fumbled for the edge of the bed, grounding myself in texture. Fabric. Skin. Anything real. Footsteps pounded outside my door. It opened fast. 2 medics rushed in. Voices overlapping, hands already reaching. Someone called my name like it was a code meant to unlock me. My instincts screamed. "Don't touch me," I snapped, louder than I meant to. The words came out broken, jagged around my breathing. They hesitated. Not enough. Ryan Vale stepped in behind them, presence slicing clean through the chaos. "Stop," he said. They froze. "I'll stabilize him," one medic protested. "Omega respiratory failure can escalate." "Step back," Ryan repeated. Not louder. Not stronger. Just final. They did. The door closed behind them, sealing the room with a soft hiss that felt far too loud in my skull. I slumped forward, elbows on my knees, head dropped, fighting to pull air into lungs that refused to cooperate. Ryan stayed where he was. Close enough to exist. Far enough not to crowd. "Slow down," he said quietly. Not a command. A suggestion timed to my breath. I tried. Failed. Laughed weakly at myself. "Pathetic," I rasped. "No," he said. "Physiological." I dragged in a shaky breath, vision dimming around the edges. "You could force me," I said between gasps. "You're an alpha." Override the response. Flood the room. Make it stop. He didn't move. "I won't." The words cut deeper than panic ever could. Anger flared through the fear, sharp enough to anchor me. Why? I demanded. This is inefficient. Something shifted in his expression. Tiny. Real. Because, Ryan said, if I take that choice away, you'll never believe you survived this. I swallowed hard, throat burning. Breathe with me, he added. Ridiculous. It worked. Not magically. Not cleanly. But his steady presence gave my instincts something to align with that didn't feel like domination. My breathing staggered, then slowly, painfully, found a rhythm. The tremors eased. The room stopped spinning. The ringing receded to a dull hum. When I finally lifted my head, sweat soaked my shirt, limbs heavy and weak. I felt wrung out. Exposed. Alive. Ryan didn't comment, didn't praise, didn't offer an analysis. He simply waited until my breathing stabilized entirely before speaking again. You should rest, he said. I nodded once, too exhausted to argue. As he turned to leave, I realized how close I'd come, not to death, but to surrender. And how the most terrifying part wasn't that he could have controlled me. It was that he refused to. My body had betrayed me first. He hadn't. And that realization split something open inside my chest I wasn't ready to name. The lights were dimmed when he came back. Not dark, just soft around the edges, like the room had learned not to press too hard. Outside the window, the forest was a mass of shadows layered over each other, depth without clarity, night without menace. I sat cross-legged on the bed this time, a glass of water sweating on the table beside me like it had run a marathon to get there. My body still felt tender, not weak, just honest in a way I resented. Ryan didn't ask if I was ready. He never did. Why negotiation? He asked instead, leaning against the wall rather than taking a chair. Casual. If you didn't know what to look for. You could have gone corporate, advocacy, academia. I snorted quietly. You say that like Omegas get handed brochures. He didn't contradict me. I stared at the glass. At my reflection folded into the darkness beyond it. I learned early that people talk when they're afraid, I said. But they only listen when they think they're choosing to. My fingers tightened around nothing. Old muscle memory. I was 14 the first time an Alfa decided I needed guidance. School counselor. Mentorship program. Very legal. Very clean. I smiled thinly. I learned more about manipulation in 6 months than most people do in a lifetime. Ryan's attention sharpened, almost imperceptibly. I figured out I could redirect panic, I continued. Lower it, slow it down. Talk people into not pulling triggers, literal or otherwise. Turns out that's a marketable skill when systems start failing. Is that when you stop trusting them? He asked. I laughed, sharp and humorless. No. That's when I started testing them. I told him about my first off-books job. A barricade situation. 2 Alphas and a scared Omega kid with a bomb vest that wasn't wired. Everyone wanted it resolved fast. Clean. With casualties neatly categorized. I realized no one cared whether the kid survived, I said. They just cared that the headline didn't. Ryan didn't interrupt. Didn't soften the air. So I talked, I said. And talked. And talked. For 4 hours. He lived. I didn't get paid a beat. I kept doing it anyway. Anger pushed up hot and familiar, undercut by something raw. The system doesn't know what to do with Omegas who don't submit or shatter. We're inconvenient. We make the math messy. Ryan watched me like he was overlaying equations I couldn't see. You choose volatile environments, he said slowly. High emotional load, no rigid hierarchy. Because hierarchy kills nuance, I shot back. Then sighed. And because if I don't stay sharp, I become exactly what they expect me to be. He nodded once, thoughtful. You're not running from control, he said. You're running from predictability. That landed uncomfortably close to truth. Congratulations, I muttered. You cracked me. Do I get a certificate? Something like amusement touched his eyes. Brief. Real. You shouldn't exist, he said, not unkindly. By most models. Story of my life. As he turned to leave, it hit me. Not like fear, but recognition. He wasn't dissecting me anymore. He was fitting me into a pattern he hadn't wanted to acknowledge. And I had the unsettling sense that understanding me was going to cost him something he hadn't planned to give. The isolated wing didn't smell like disinfectant. That was the first sensation that set my nerves on edge. It smelled like nothing. Sterile, in a different way. Air filtered so thoroughly it stripped texture from sound and scent alike. The hallway lights were dimmer here, as if even illumination was considered a risk. Doors lined the corridor, identical and sealed, each one whispering the same quiet promise contained. Ryan walked beside me again, but this time I didn't comment. Something was wrong. He's cooperative, Ryan said, as we stopped in front of the last door. That's why you're here. Cooperative. The word tasted sour. The door opened. Theo sat on the bed with his hands folded neatly in his lap. He looked fine. Clean. Well fed. No bruises. No fear visible on the surface. Brown hair cut short. Neutral clothes. Spine straight. Eyes forward. Empty. His gaze flicked up when we entered and then back down again, reflexive and immediate. "Hello," he said softly. His voice was steady, distant. Like it had learned not to echo. My chest tightened. "How are you, Theo?" Ryan asked. "I'm stable," Theo replied. "Thank you for asking, sir." "Sir," I took a step forward before I thought better of it. "Do you know why I'm here?" Theo hesitated for exactly half a second, long enough for training to assert itself. "You're a consultant," he said. "Omega classification. Not a threat." I flinched. "That's what they taught you to say?" "Yes," Theo said calmly. I turned sharply to Ryan, heat flaring up my spine. "This is what cooperation looks like to you?" Ryan's expression didn't change. That was almost worse. "Theo chose compliance," he said. "After multiple destabilizing incidents." I laughed once, a sharp, broken sound I didn't recognize as my own. "Chose?" I snapped. "You call this a choice?" Theo's hands clenched. Just for a moment. Then stilled again. "I'm fine," he said quickly. "Please don't escalate." That did it. Something inside me cracked, not loud, not dramatic, but deep and ugly. Anger surged up fast and hot, choking out my carefully maintained control. I turned back to Theo. "What happens if you don't comply?" Theo blinked. "Once. That would be counterproductive." The phrasing was too clean. Too stripped of self. "What happens if you feel scared?" I pressed. Theo's lips parted. Closed. His eyes flicked briefly to Ryan, seeking extraction. "I don't," he said. My vision blurred. "You don't?" I whispered. "Or you're not allowed to say you do." Ryan stepped in. "Niko." "No," I snapped, rounding on him. "You don't get to moderate this." My instincts roared, loud and unchecked, pheromones spiking sharp and bitter in the air. Hunters shifted outside the door. Someone muttered a warning. I didn't care. "You broke him," I said, voice shaking now. "You took an Omega, and trained the life out of him because it made him easier to manage." "That's not fair," one of the hunters barked. "It's efficient," another added. I laughed. Wild, incredulous, angry enough to burn. "You keep using that word like it absolves you." Theo's breathing hitched. The first visible crack in his perfect compliance. "Please," he murmured. "Please don't argue. It upsets the balance." I went still. Balance. I looked at him. Really looked. And saw it clearly at last. This wasn't an anomaly. This was the endpoint. I turned back to Ryan, chest heaving, control utterly gone. "This is what your system produces," I said. "Not safety. Not order. This." Silence swallowed the room. Ryan's jaw tightened. A subtle but undeniable shift. "Enough," he said quietly. Not to me, but to the hunters gathering at the door. They backed off. Theo stared at the floor again, shoulders drawn in. I took a step back. Suddenly exhausted. Rage curdling into grief I hadn't consented to feeling. For the first time since I'd woken up breathing too easily, I realized the truth. I wasn't fighting for my freedom anymore. I was fighting because if I didn't, this would become normal. And I had never felt less in control of myself, or more certain that silence was no longer an option. The analytic hall felt nothing like the rest of the base. Too open. Too lit. Screens covered the walls in neat grids of data streams, heat maps, incident timelines, probability curves. This was where chaos was turned into something clean enough to believe in. I hated it immediately. Mara Quinn stood near the central console, tablet in hand. She looked less surprised to see me than she should have been, which told me everything I needed to know about who had pushed for this meeting. Ryan stood a few steps back, arms crossed, observing. Not the data, but me. "Walk us through it," Mara said. Calm. Neutral. Professional. You asked for access. You have it. I stared at the nearest screen. Incident clusters along the west corridor. Supposed rogue activity. Supposed escalation trends. Supposed. You're tracking outcomes, I said slowly. Not causes. A few hunters shifted. One scoffed. That's how threat assessment works, someone muttered. No, I replied without looking at him. That's how narratives work. I stepped closer to the console, fingers hovering over the interface. You flag incidents as independent. They're not. I pulled up 3 events, different zones, different times, different threat ratings. On the surface, unrelated. See this delay? I said, highlighting a gap between first contact and escalation. That's not indecision. That's negotiation failure. Mara leaned in despite herself. These situations all had intermediaries, I continued. Unofficial ones, omegas, betas, local fixers. You cut them out to centralize control. A pause. And then things spiraled, I finished. One of the hunters laughed, sharp and dismissive. You're saying this is our fault? I'm saying, I shot back. You're turning preventable fear into justification for force. Ryan's gaze sharpened. I switched screens. And this is the part you don't see, because you don't want to. A pattern emerged, not spatial, but emotional. Escalations following policy shifts. Crackdowns preceding retaliation. Fear recycling itself. You hunt monsters, I said. But you've built a system that manufactures them. The room went very quiet. Mara's jaw tensed. If that were true, we'd see internal dissent. Whistleblowers. You do, I said. You just label them unstable and burn their credibility. My throat tightened despite myself. You train hunters to suppress doubt, I went on. Just like you train omegas to suppress instinct. Different methods. Same outcome. One of them snapped. Careful. No, Ryan said. The word landed heavy. I breathed out slowly, grounding myself. You're not villains, I said, quieter now. You're predictable. That's worse. I met Ryan's eyes directly. You inherit a system built on fear. Reward obedience, punish deviation, and call it protection. Of course you keep losing control. The admission hung there, raw and dangerous. Mara exhaled. If you're right, she said carefully, then every model we're using is flawed. Yes, I replied. And no amount of killing will fix that. Ryan straightened slightly. Then, what would? I hesitated. This was the moment. The pivot. The place where you either stayed an observer or became complicit. Listening, I said. Before things break. To the people in the margins. To the ones you've categorized as variables instead of signals. Silence followed. Not the hostile kind. The thinking kind. I felt it then. The shift. I wasn't being evaluated anymore. I was being considered. Mara nodded once, sharp and decisive. If we recalibrate response protocols using emotional indicators, we'd need a human model. Someone who can read intent under pressure. All eyes turned to me. I resisted the urge to laugh. Ryan's voice was steady when he spoke, which makes Niko no longer a holding risk. Then what am I? I asked, heart suddenly loud in my chest. Ryan held my gaze. Necessary, he said. The word hit like a lock clicking into place. Not trapping me, but anchoring me somewhere I hadn't expected to stand. Hunters lied better than they killed. But this time, the truth had slipped through anyway. And it had changed the math. The negotiation room was empty when it hit me. No screens. No forest beyond the glass this time. Just a dull reflection of myself in the dark pane, and a table that felt too far away to grab. The air was still. Heavy with the aftermath of too many conclusions drawn too quickly. I thought I was fine. That's the trick panic plays. It waits until you think you're safe. The pressure started behind my eyes, a sudden blinding tightness that made the room tilt. My chest seized, breath catching halfway in like my lungs had forgotten the second half of the job. Heat flooded my skin, fast and uncontrolled. No, no, no. My pheromones spiked before I could throttle them back. Fear sent, sharp and raw, bleeding into the room like a confession I hadn't agreed to make. My instincts screamed for cover, for submission, for something to end the sensation. I sank into the nearest chair, fingers white-knuckled around the edge of the table. Get it together, I muttered, voice shaking. You don't get to fall apart now. Footsteps stopped just inside the doorway. Ryan Vale stood there, eyes already on me. He didn't say my name. He didn't move closer. He closed the door behind him quietly and stayed where he was. That alone nearly broke me. The panic surged, hard and fast, vision narrowing to pinpricks of light. My breathing went shallow, frantic, useless. I tasted copper. My throat locked. I swallowed. Failed. Ryan lowered himself into the chair across from me with deliberate care, matching my eye level. Still no scent. No pressure. No attempt to drown me out with alpha dominance. I'm here, he said. 2 words. Grounded. Calm. My instincts recoiled, confused. He was doing it wrong. Alphas didn't wait. They overrode. They pushed. They took control and called it help. You should, I gasped. You should counter it. I won't, he said quietly. Anger flared through the fear. You're an alpha, I snapped. Do something. Ryan shook his head once. If I impose control now, your body will associate panic with obedience. That's not, I sucked in a broken breath. That's not your problem. It is, he replied without hesitation. The room went very still. My pheromones screamed into the silence, desperate, exposed, humiliating. I pressed my palms flat against the table, grounding on the smooth surface, on the sound of my own ragged breathing. Ryan leaned forward just enough that I could focus on the rise and fall of his chest. Watch me, he said. Breathe. Slow. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. He didn't count for me. Didn't instruct. Just demonstrated, steady, unhurried, human. I tried to match him. Failed. Tried again. The panic snarled, refusing to let go. But something in my instincts began to latch onto the rhythm anyway. Predatory awareness, flipped on its head, not threat but presence. Minutes stretched. The world softened around the edges. My breathing evened out in jagged increments, panic loosening its grip grudgingly. My shoulders dropped. The room stopped spinning. The scent of fear faded back into something tolerable, something mine again. Ryan didn't move until he was certain. Only when my pulse settled did he speak. You listen well, he said softly. I negotiate, I rasped. Different skill. A corner of his mouth twitched. Same instinct, he replied. You read pressure and respond instead of reacting. I closed my eyes briefly, exhausted. You heard it, I said. The panic. Yes. And you didn't flinch? No. My voice came out smaller than I meant it to. Why? Ryan met my gaze, expression unguarded in a way that felt intentional. Dangerous almost. Because panic is information, he said. Not a weakness. Something inside my chest shifted at that. Subtle. Final. For the first time since waking up breathing too easily. Since realizing the ground beneath me wasn't solid anymore, I let myself lean back in the chair without bracing for impact. Trust didn't arrive like relief. It arrived like silence. And in that silence, breathing steady at last, I understood exactly why Ryan Vale was the most dangerous alpha I had ever met. He could hear panic. And he chose not to use it. The door was already open when I got there. That was the problem. Morning light spilled into the entrance hall in a wide, unapologetic sweep, cutting clean lines across polished stone. The outer doors stood apart. Heavy metal pulled back far enough to let in air that smelled like wet earth and pine. Freedom, unfiltered, and inconvenient. No alarms. No guards blocking the way. Ryan Vale stood off to the side, hands clasped loosely behind his back, posture relaxed in that infuriatingly deliberate way of his. He hadn't escorted me here. He hadn't even told me to come. He'd just made it possible. My steps slowed as I crossed the threshold between inner corridors and open space. My instincts buzzed, confused, orienting toward something they had been allowed to consider since I woke up breathing too easily. You can leave. The thought landed heavy. This is it? I asked, stopping a few feet short of the open air. No paperwork, no escort, no dramatic speech about consequences? Ryan glanced at me. You wouldn't respect it. I huffed a laugh. True. The forest beyond the doors waited in utter indifference. No promises. No guarantees. Just distance. I could walk out. Right now. No contract. No obligation. No collar disguised as choice. That's what scared me. Once I leave, I said carefully, I don't come back under threat. I know. And if I stay? Ryan met my eyes, unflinching. You stay because you choose to. My chest tightened, Not panic this time, but something quieter. Something like grief for the version of myself that had been braced for captivity and found none. I thought of Theo. Of the analysis room. Of panic that hadn't been weaponized. Of a system cracking under truth instead of brute force. I stepped closer to the doorway. Cold air brushed my skin. Real air. Untamed. This was the part where people expected gratitude. Relief. Praise. Instead, I felt hollow. I spent years fighting my way out of places that looked a lot like this, I said softly, staring at the open path ahead. I always thought once the door opened, everything would make sense. Ryan said nothing. The silence gave me space to hear my own heartbeat. Steady, grounded, mine. I don't want to leave, I admitted. The words came out before I'd fully agreed with them. They hung in the air between us, exposed and irrevocable. Ryan didn't smile. He didn't step closer. He didn't mark the moment as anything more than what it was. Then don't, he said. No claim, no relief. No trap hidden in the answer. I exhaled slowly and stepped back from the threshold, letting the door remain open behind me. Not slammed shut. Not locked. Just there. Ryan shifted slightly, repositioning himself beside me, not in front. Never in front. Staying doesn't make you mine, he said quietly. And leaving wouldn't make you disloyal. I nodded once, throat tight. For the first time since awakening in a room that looked too kind to be honest, I understood something fundamental. Freedom wasn't about doors. It was about being allowed to hesitate. And choosing anyway. Ryan's office looked nothing like the rest of the base. No sterile white. No mirrored surfaces. Dark wood, low lighting. Shelves lined with physical books instead of projections. Maps marked in graphite rather than glowing red overlays. It felt lived in. Chosen. I took that in and filed it away. People curated spaces the way they curated power. I didn't sit where he gestured. I chose the chair across from him, and crossed one leg over the other with deliberate ease. The old instinct to perform deference twitched and died. Okay, I said. If I'm staying, we renegotiate. Ryan settled behind his desk, posture neutral. Go on. I'm not an asset, I continued. I'm a consultant. I choose my involvement, my hours, and my level of exposure. I don't handle interrogations, and I don't clean up messes made by people who refuse to listen. A pause. I retain bodily autonomy, I added dryly. You'd think that wouldn't need saying. It doesn't, Ryan replied. But I accept the specification. I blinked at him. You're bad at arguing. I'm good at not making unnecessary ones. Fair. I leaned forward slightly. I have access to your analytical models, not filtered summaries. If I say an operation should be delayed, it is delayed. No revenge protocol for me telling alphas things they don't like. Ryan considered that, then nodded. Agreed. My mouth twitched. Also, you'll reassign Theo. His gaze sharpened. That's a larger decision. I know, I replied. Which is why you'll start with observation. Therapy access. No forced compliance metrics. Silence bloomed. Controlled. Thoughtful. Finally, done, Ryan said. With progress reviews? I'll take it. I leaned back, waiting for the tension to return. It didn't. Instead, something warm and unexpected spread through my chest, satisfaction tinged with disbelief. You're enjoying this, Ryan observed. Professional hazard, I said. I like negotiations where no one bleeds. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. Brief. Gone. You challenge assumptions without trying to dominate the space, he said. That's rare. So is an alpha who listens without planning conquest, I shot back. The air shifted, not charged, aware. Something unspoken passed between us, subtle and electric. Not instinct. Choice. Ryan rose from his chair, moving to the side of the desk, not into my personal space but closer than before. Close enough for me to notice the warmth his presence generated. Not scent. Something quieter. I don't need you loyal, he said. I need you honest. I met his gaze, heartbeat steady. You'll get both or neither. A beat. Fair terms, he said. I stood, smoothing imaginary creases from my clothes. Then we're done here. For now. I turned at the door. You realize if this works, people will call it dangerous. Ryan's eyes flicked up, sharp with something like amusement. They already do. I smiled then. Real, unguarded. For the first time in a long while, negotiations didn't feel like survival. They felt like partnership, and the attraction curling quietly beneath it all felt less like threat and more like possibility. Time did the quiet work no one liked to credit. Weeks passed, then months. Nothing ended cleanly, but some things loosened their grip. The base changed in unfinished ways, new protocols layered over old instincts, cautious enough to survive review, bold enough to matter. It wasn't a revolution, it was pressure redirected. Theo laughed for the first time on a Tuesday afternoon. It startled all of us. He sat across from me in a small common room that used to be a storage space and now had plants that struggled bravely toward the light. His posture was worse. His words came slower. His eyes fuller. "I hate herbal tea," he said solemnly, holding a mug in both hands like it had personally wronged him. "You don't have to like it," I replied. "You just have to stay long enough to complain consistently." He snorted, caught off guard by the sound of his own amusement, then quickly covered it with his sleeve. Old habits died slowly. Progress reviews called it gradual re-emergence of autonomous response. I called it breathing. Hunters didn't love the changes. Some adapted. Some transferred. A few fought it until they couldn't anymore. Control didn't vanish. It learned restraint. Fear stopped being policy. Ryan took more heat than anyone else for that. He stood unflinching through committee interrogations, external audits, and quiet challenges from alphas, who mistook listening for weakness. He adjusted without retreating. Bent without breaking. We argued more often than I'd expected. "You're compromising too much," I snapped once, standing over his desk, hands braced against the wood. "And you're underestimating how fast things shatter," he replied calmly. We were evenly matched. It annoyed us both. We never touched in ways that weren't deliberately chosen. No territorial claims. No instinctual overrides masquerading as affection. When proximity happened, it was earned. A shoulder close enough to brush. A shared pause in conversation. Neither of us rushed to end. The attraction never demanded. It waited. I still had my room with the window. I still checked the door every morning. Not to see if it was locked, but because that ritual mattered. Leaving had stayed optional. Freedom held better when it wasn't tested every day. One evening, as I leaned against the glass watching the forest darken, Ryan joined me. No announcement. No command. "Ready to leave yet?" he asked, tone carefully neutral. I considered it. Really did. The world beyond the base hadn't gotten kinder. Systems still liked obedience. Omegas still learned early when to stop smiling. But here, inconvenient things were allowed to stay inconvenient. "No," I said. "But I like knowing I could." He nodded. "So do I." We stood in companionable silence. Two figures framed by the reflection of something neither submissive nor dominant, just present. I thought about the room I'd woken up in. The ease of breathing that had felt so wrong, it bordered on betrayal. How every instinct had screamed that kindness was a trap. I'd been right to be cautious. Just wrong about the outcome. I wasn't given the right to breathe. I took it, and he didn't stop me. And that turned out to be enough.